right, Romanticism, Unit 7.1, Part 5. Here's our little interlude to Romanticism. We've covered already a lot of isms: nationalism, conservatism, liberalism. Then we talked about revolutions of 1848 and reform in England, and now we're off to our last two isms, Romanticism and Socialism. So, Romanticism, 1800 to 1850, you can see from the note in the box here, is an often tested essay topic on the AP exam, which is why you want to memorize a couple of these individuals in each category. It is very often tested. I mean, like a question might be, analyze this work or this individual and how they are romantic or how they are part of Romanticism, etc. So you want to be able to produce a name here. And so we need to get into the characteristics of Romanticism then. As we discussed in last class period, before you got into your groups, Romanticism's characteristics is emotion over reason. Or this is like where, it's very appropriate. I'm recording this for you on Valentine's Day. This is like the touch, this is like feeling. You're going to feel things. Emphasize the human senses, passion, and faith. The glorification of nature. This is a reaction to like the Industrial Revolution, a reaction to Enlightenment. They feel that, the Enlightenment is stifling, it had stifled people and made it, just this way, we are all this, same. And that the Industrial Revolution is ruining the environment or nature, and that's harmful to, and romantics are going to be, nature is beautiful, and needs to be recognized. We get the term Romanticism from our Romantic languages, and it's kind of harkening back, as I'll talk in a little bit about, they kind of glorified the past or made it very romantic. And so our Romance languages written in the vernacular, or stories written in the vernacular in the Middle Ages, like French, Italian, and Spanish, are Romance languages. That's kind of what they're going to pull from. As I said, they reject the Enlightenment what they would consider cold view of the past, which was counter-progressive to human history. They become fascinated. They don't dismiss history. Like I said, they actually become fascinated with the past, like in the good old day, but they romanticize it, like in the good old day in the 1950s. But was it really good? Civil rights hadn't taken place, so they romanticize the past. Especially we're going to see in some cases with stuff from the Middle Ages. Encourage personal freedom and flexibility. They're going to say, you have creativity and emotion. Be an individual. Express yourself. Be whoever you want to be. Express who you are. You are different. You are special. It's very different than we saw like thinkers in the Enlightenment saying. It had been reason, reason, reason. The new reaction to that is emotion and faith. It's going to be like dare to be instead of dare to know. To feel the difference. So Romanticism, I get sarcastic a little bit with Romanticism because I'm definitely more of an Enlightenment kind of mind, but we will truck through it. They emphasized feeling, and so through this feeling, humanitarian movements are going to spark up to fight slavery, poverty, industrial evils. They're going to be feeling things, and they're going to be like, what about the poor? What about the slaves? What can we do? Like I said, in some cases, they'll draw upon ideals of the Middle Ages, such as honor, faith, and chivalry. They'll glorify those good old days. It'll be very popular in Germany. In Britain, novels of Sir Walter Scott and Gothic architecture are going to rise, and we'll take a look at all of that. And in Central and Eastern Europe, romantics focused on peasant life and transcribed folk songs, tales, and proverbs. We'll also look at instances of that. And so moving on, we need to talk about our philosophical forerunners of Romanticism. Our first here, very familiar to you, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. We talked about him in the Enlightenment, but remember, he had kind of been like our odd man out. He was different from the others. He and other romantics kind of see our uniqueness, and they kind of like nationalism, and they believe that Enlightenment has stifled these things. Rousseau gave us The Social Contract in 1762, which is his most important work, and in which he believes society and materialism corrupted human nature. So these industries of society have corrupted human nature, that man was this noble savage who was in a state of nature, but was being every day kept down in chains, the chains of society, that we're born free, but everywhere he is in chains. And to get out of these chains, you need to get in touch with your feelings, and that freedom should be motivated by passion and desire and feeling and reasoned sentimentality. And so all of these things, so Rousseau being different than our Enlightenment thinkers, falls under the forerunners, as I told you, in the Enlightenment, of Romanticism, with his ideal of human nature and what society did to us. The next one I didn't make a slide for, because I really, he goes under Romanticism, but I really don't see the AP exam testing you on it. But, if they do, he's in your notes. 1724 to 1804, Immanuel Kant accepted rationalism of the Enlightenment. So we had him in the Enlightenment before. Kind of a little, could go in two categories though. But because he did preserve his belief in human freedom, immortality, and the existence of God. And he will help establish philosophy as a separate branch from religion. We're also going to see that Romanticism, because like I said, all eras are prompted by another, was largely inspired by the French Revolution. Because what was the French Revolution? It was a feeling. Like, whether it was a feeling of, I'm going to go kill people, it was a feeling. There is definitely feeling in the French Revolution. And we're going to see the Sturm und Drang, which means storm and stress in German. And it will be used by German romantics in 1770s and 80s to convey emotional intensity. Like, this is all about emotion. German stories are a reaction to all the overly rational writings of the Enlightenment. And so they are going to be about the individual. They are going to be about like the emotion of this individual out kind of against the world. And so they are very much reactionary to the rational writings of the Enlightenment. And so you can see Storm and Stress. Kind of thought this was funny, this nail polish color called Sturm und Drang. There's a nail polish company that knows their history. Storm and Stress. So next we need to talk about George William Friedrich Hegel, 1770 to 1831. We were going to talk about him again when we get to communism, because he's going to influence Marx. So we will get to speak about him again. He is a leading figure of German idealism. He kind of rejects all rational philosophies. He believes mankind can be led by his soul. And he is going to give us the term dialectic, which is, how do you know what's right? He's going to give us, this format of how do you know what is right, and that's called the dialectic. He's going to say you have an initial idea, and that's your thesis. So let's say your thesis was black, okay? It's going to be challenged by an opposing view. So that's called your antithesis or your antithesis. And that might, would be white, okay? So you have black challenged by white, and this will result in a hybrid of the two ideas, or a synthesis. So in our case, our synthesis right here would be gray, and this is our new thesis. But this is always going to be countered by an antithesis or an antithesis. So that may be gray is then countered by pink, and so our thesis countered by our antithesis leads us to a new thesis. And this, he's going to say, is going to continue on and on and on. It's an unfolding process. In true, what you know is true, what you know is right, is what you feel. Okay? This is the opposite of absolute truth, like we saw in the Enlightenment. And as I said, Marx is going to take this and apply it to society. And in fact, this is the dialectic in action, and this is going to be how Marx applies it to society, and we're going to come back to that. But it's just this idea that you have an idea, there's always going to be an opposite side to that idea. That's going to create a hybrid of those two ideas, a synthesis, and then a new thesis comes from that. And so it goes on and on and on forever. Our next individual is going to be Johann Gietliewicz, 1762 to 1814, who we already spoke about. Use point 11 previously in our notes. He gives us in Addresses to the German Nation. And he had developed a romantic nationalism that saw Germans as superior over the other places. We talked about him with nationalism, but just to let you know that he could be popped in with romanticism as well. Remember, he is going to start, to use that nationalism to say one group is better than another. and he is going to give us, the fact that you live, you love, and you suffer in your own way. All of these things are feelings. Discover yourself, express yourself, write your own drama, etc. He will also use his nationalistic sentiment to become very anti-Semitic. And so, he's going to use his, to have very strong feelings against other groups of people. But he's going to be, kind of the one to say, march to the tune of your own drummer. So moving out of that, we need to move into romantic poetry. Romantics are going to believe that poetry was supreme over all other literary forms. The expression of one's soul is poetry. Only through beauty can man make his way to freedom are going to be some of the things that we're going to see incorporated into this poetry. Freedom is unleashing the passion of the soul. I like poetry. I interpret poetry, but there's some poetry there that I'm just like, what were they? So there's some romantic poetry that we're going to get into, but anyway, Germany, Friedrich von Schiller, 1759 to 1805, wrote about man achieving freedom through the aesthetic of beauty. So that pretty much, the epitome of what Romanticism is, aesthetic of beauty. Spoke of the universal human solidarity. His poem Ode to Joy will be incorporated into Beethoven and his Ninth Symphony, which I will actually be playing for you a little bit later when we get to music and Romanticism. Okay, so you also have Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. I know it looks like Goethe in your notes, but we're going to talk about him in a minute with literature because we have more to say about him there. So I'm going to go ahead and skip down to what's on the slide. Now, in England, we are going to talk about William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And they were deeply influenced by the philosophy of Rousseau, one of our philosophical forerunners of Romanticism that we just talked about, and in the spirit of the early French Revolution. And in 1798, both poets will publish lyrical ballads, which is one of the most influential literary works in the history of the English language. And so here you go. You can see the cover page there. This is Wordsworth. This is Coleridge. And why are they the most influential? Because they don't follow the rules of poetry from Greece and Rome. Remember, Romanticism, be yourself. There's no rules. Express yourself how you want to. I think Romantics are almost like the first hippies. They go out to your own drum. So, anyway. They defied, as I said, classic rules and abandoned flowery poetic conventions for ordinary language. They used common person language. They used free verse. It didn't have to go by these established rules of Greece and Rome or the classic rules. They are going to say that nature was a mysterious force from which the poet could learn. And they're going to portray simple subjects in a highly idealist and majestic way. And so what I mean by nature was a mysterious force from which the poet can learn, if you look at the gardens of Versailles, okay, they are very orderly, very organized, very on a grid, very laid out, very by the rule, by the book. If you look at a garden that would represent, so this would represent like an Enlightenment garden, that's the time period, correct? And this would represent a romantic garden. And so you see like the romantic garden looks like, somebody just dropped a bag of seeds and whatever grows wherever. It's a free growing. And so I like to use this visual to compare with students. This is like Enlightenment. This is Romanticism. That's, there's the, naturally you were just feeling it whenever you planted the flowers there. All right. So moving on, we need to get to Sir Walter Scott. He is Scottish, and he is going to give us long narrative poems and historical novels. He is going to be the first to popularize historic novels, so yay for him. I do like historical novels, so I do have some stuff with Romanticism that I'm into. He gives us Rob Roy, which is about a chivalrous outlaw. So remember, it's about hearkening back to those good old days, like chivalry. So he's a chivalrous outlaw. We get Ivanhoe, which is a story of a fight between Saxon and Norman knights in medieval England. So again, the Middle Ages, hearkening in, romanticizing the Middle Ages. And he represented the Romantics' interest in history. So he really epitomizes that interest of Romantics to look back at history and romanticize it. And he was very much influenced by the German Romanticism of Goethe, which I also told you we'll just come back to, so don't worry, I won't forget about it. Our next individual is Lord Byron. If there was ever an emo guy of the Romantic era, he is the emo guy. He is melancholy. He embodies the melancholic romantic figure. He is actually a bisexual. We know this because he's going to take on a 15-year-old boy lover. He has many, many, many affairs with married women. And he's going to then get married, have a very unhappy marriage, then have more affairs. He's even going to claim to have had sex with 250 women in the city of Venice in 1 year. And he's in his 20s, okay? He gave us the poem Don Juan. And so if you know anything about Don Juan, it is very much about, the ladies' man. But what he's going to say about it, and like in the poem Don Juan, he's going to say, it's not me. I'm not a womanizer. I can't help it. They just all want me. Okay, so Lord Byron, I don't know. I mean, you just can't not like him. I don't know. He's so romantic that he gets all caught up. Remember when we talked about the Greek revolts for independence, the Greek revolutions? He's so romantic that he gets all caught up like, oh, look at the Greeks. Like, oh, they need their freedom. That he goes and fights for the Greeks following his heart, and he will die fighting for Greek independence against the Turks in 1824. So there's a true romantic. Followed his heart. Our next individual is Percy Shelley, 1792 to 1822. He gives us the work Prometheus Unbound, which details the revolt of humans against the society that oppresses them. Again, back to that ideal, like of Rousseau, that society is what oppresses us and we were born free, and to break free of our chains we need to get out of society. What's kind of interesting about him is he marries a 16-year-old, and then he will actually leave her for another 16-year-old who is Mary Shelley, who gave us Frankenstein. And so, kind of also some romanticism in there and thinking about the Gothic sense. And so, just interesting name dropping there, Mary Shelley, which gives Mary Shelley Wollstonecraft. So just tracking through history there. What is very ironic about Percy Shelley is that you will actually drown on a ship named the Don Juan. So I don't know. He interests me. His whole life, who his wife was, and who his daughter will, or not his daughter, but who her daughter will be, and then the way he dies. Don Juan. Shout out to Lord Byron, I guess. All right. So moving on from poetry, I wrote what romantics see as the supreme over all literary forms. We will move to the actual category of literature. And we'll start with George Sand, who, as you can tell from these pictures, I didn't lose my mind, is not actually a man, was actually a woman whose real name was Amandine Aurore Lucie Dupin. 1874 to 1876. Of course, she had taken on a pseudonym because she's a woman, just to get her things published. And she emphasized themes of romantic love, of nature, and moral idealism. And here we are. I promised you we come back to Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, 1749 to 1832, and he is our best example of early romantic literature. And he gives us his book, Sorrows of the Young Werther, which is actually written in the form of a series of letters. So here's some more modern covers here. It has actually come back, it's kind of timeless, the story, the romanticism of it. And his character Werther is going to personify the romantic hero who was misunderstood and rejected by society, but stayed true always to his inner feelings, such as a true romantic would. And what happens to him, this all-feely guy, is he is rejected by a girl whom he loved. She is already actually engaged to be married to another man, and he actually becomes good friends with her and the other man. And as he watches this, he realizes she is never going to leave him, that she will never love him, and it will result in his suicide. This novel influenced many others during this era with tragic stories of lovers. And so it's kind of a timeless tragic stories of lovers here. He will also give us the work Faust, in 1806, which is a tragic drama. And this is where we get the Faustian bargain. If you've ever heard that, I don't know if anybody would say that. I think more they say like sell your soul. Would you sell your soul to the devil is what it's turned into. But the Faustian bargain is that in this tragic drama, Faust sells his soul to the devil in return for the acquisition of all knowledge. And it demonstrates romantic criticism of the Enlightenment's rationality and empiricism. So it's like satirical towards the Enlightenment. Like you would sell your soul to the devil for all knowledge. Like just be and feel and be true to yourself. You don't need to know all that. And I would have to say he is perhaps greatest of the German romantic authors. I mean, his works have really been hung on to. All right, so next, Victor Hugo. We've mentioned in passing Victor Hugo several times, so that's why he's not very long in your notes here, but gave us The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Les Mis, and he's going to just kind of tell us, even the ugly can be used as art, like even the ugly can be beautiful. That's kind of a nice sentiment. Romanticism in his novels was evident with his use of fantastic characters, strange settings, and human emotions. You can see all of that if any of you seen The Hunchback of Notre Dame, whether it be the black and white version or the cartoon version or Les Mis. He is using fantastic characters, strange settings, and human emotions. Very romantic. Next is one you should probably all know, and that is Grimm's Fairy Tales. This is a collection of German folk stories, and what the Grimm brothers did, Jacob and Wilhelm, they go out and interview Germans in the countryside and blend together all of their stories to create the Grimm's Fairy Tales. You can see it became a movie, The Brothers Grimm. There's a TV show Grimm now, still very relevant. And they were very influenced by Herder's views about preserving songs and sayings of German culture that we talked about in point number 11. This preserving of German culture, nationalism, that feeds right into Romanticism. Okay? They provide a strong example of how German nationalism and Romanticism were tied together. Okay? So this is how Romanticism applies to the time period that we're talking about. Very much will go with nationalism. I mean, what is nationalism, right? Like, be yourself. Be ruled by someone who's like yourself. Be proud of your culture. Be proud of your identity, so hand in hand. All right, so next category is going to be art. And this art period, just like many of the others that we looked at, just like the Baroque was a reaction to the time periods before, we had Renaissance being a reaction. This artistic movement is a reaction to neoclassical art that was very political. And so as you can see from Romanticism, art and Romanticism is going to be like, there's no rules, do it your own way, whatever you feel, man, paint it, that kind of thing. So we have Caspar David Friedrich, who gives us Wanderers right here. Above the mist. It's also in your notes to the right-hand side. And it gives us a mystical view of the sublime power of nature. And it's conveyed in many of his paintings. Like this one is called Morning. So, nature, sunrise. Hence the title Morning. And then we have this one here, which is usually students' favorite. And it is called Cemetery, but still a big focus on the nature and almost like kind of a parlay, like when winter hits, it's like a cemetery because nature's so beautiful and grand, Next artist we have is Eugène Delacroix. He is the most famous French romantic painter. If you think back, he is, I think, actually, if I remember correctly, he is the illegitimate son of the French representative at the Congress of Vienna, Talleyrand, I believe is his lineage here, so just a little tidbit of info. He was interested in the exotic and dramatic use of color within paintings, which you can see here. This is liberty leading the people, and so you can probably very easily pick out the theme here. We have the red, white, and blue flag, which is French Revolution. Of course, the woman is symbolizing liberty here with the bourgeoisie or the working class following her. It's his most famous work, and it's the portrayal of the 1830 revolution in France. So, not during the French Revolution, but the revolution of 1830. Let's see. I have what I'm painting if I included. Oh, the massacre of Chios during the Greek Revolution. So here we go. The Greek Revolution. So inspired by these, I guess what you would say, revolutions caused by feeling, and he uses that feeling and dramatic use of color to express that. Next we have Theodore Géricault, and he gives us the raft of Medusa. It's important to note that he kind of paints during the last years of Napoleon, and this is based off an actual shipwreck off the west coast of Africa, and what that symbolizes is just the power of nature. Remember, Romanticism and nature. And the themes of his works of art often show power of nature and man's attempt. Like, this is the attempt of man to survive. It's showing that nature has a force that man may just be lucky to survive. He is going to show human stress and suffering, because suffering is a feeling too, right? Like, you probably notice that you're feeling when you're suffering even more than you do like when you're happy. So he's going to show us human stress and suffering. Our next individual is J.M.W. Turner. He is an English painter, which is why I didn't have to, stress with a pronunciation there. He will also depict nature's power and terror, and often wild storms and sinking ships were his favorite subjects. You can see here the ships here. I mean, this is very romantic. I'm feeling this shipwreck. I'm feeling it. This is what it looks like to me. Ships here and the calm waters. Many paintings of landscapes, seascapes. I don't know, sunrise, sun up, sunrises, sundowns. All of that. All right, and so he and our next individual are probably our most prominent romantic art figures, and that next individual is John Constable. He is also an English painter, and he kind of paints on, the bank of the Thames, and he is going to paint rural English landscapes in which human beings were at one with their environment. He's going to paint the countryside where you're at one with nature, and so very much nature, but also the inclusion of human beings being at one. You have these kids, where's my mouse? There we go. Playing in the creek, and then there's left the animals to do as they will, and then we have the people just being one with nature. I'm telling you, early hippies. Just gonna say it again. All right. So next is music. Mr. Beethoven. So romantic music was going to place a strong connection with emotion as well as nationalism, because they go hand in hand here for us, which is conveyed through the use of national folk songs. So it also goes back to, the Germans with and your folk songs that have been passed down and you've been singing around the hearth forever is going to be very much connected with emotion and nationalism. He is actually a son of an alcoholic court, Beethoven, I should say, son of an alcoholic court musician, so I guess you could say he's got some musical lineage in his blood. He is the most famous. You probably have heard his name more than any of the other romantic musicians that we're going to talk about. He is, and by all accounts, a homely individual, so not very good looking. But on the other side of that, he is going to be our transitional or our bridge figure between the classical and romantic eras. He is going to use emotion over reason, and his music is a reaction to the structure of classical music. He is one of the first composers to convey inner human emotion through music. I mean, you are going to go, and that is why, and he's probably one of the most famous, go through an emotional journey through his music. He definitely epitomizes the genius who is not constrained by patronage. He doesn't have to worry about, I'm just going to create this music piece for the king that paid for it. He is creating music for everyone, something for everyone. Many of his latter works are actually be written when he was deaf. He loses his hearing as he gets older. And so you can say that makes him the best romantic musician, right? Because he is truly creating music that comes from the harmonies of his soul. So there you go. He was the first composer to incorporate vocal music in a symphony by using the text to one of Schiller's poems. As we talked about very early in this lecture, Ode to Joy, and the last movement of his Ninth Symphony, which I'm going to play for you in just a second. But I want to talk to you about the statue here in Austria of Beethoven. It's going to show his duality. It's going to show, some of the classicalism that he keeps by his dress here, but the duality between classical and romantic. He's got the bourgeoisie coat on, okay, classical, but then it's incorporating a Roman toga, which is going to show, like the hearkening back to the good old, we're going to have a blending here. And so it's romantic and it's classical. However, because of his blending, because he doesn't follow all of the rules, the public at some points are going to struggle to follow him. And you still hear people say today, like, I do not get classical music, I do not get Beethoven. And it's because he followed no rules. It wasn't like, boom, 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 this is what it's going to be. He didn't follow that. And so, in 1824, we're going to get the Ninth Symphony. I'm going to play it for you. I would like you to listen to, at least like 3 minutes of it. If you haven't gotten goosebumps by some point, you have no soul. No, right? You just don't have an appreciation for Romanticism. So, I'm going to play that for you. This is, when I play this for you, this is almost why Germans, or you can forgive Germans just a little bit. Because of Beethoven. Ode to Joy. Emotional journey. All right, and that was some 1824 awesomeness. You've just been Beethovenized. All right, so the rest of these we're going to move through fairly quickly. There's just a lot. Remember, you just need to memorize 3. I am going to go through them, but we're pretty much going to need to work our way up to how Romanticism is connected to politics and revolution, and kind of review some of our major individuals, those that have been repeated. You would probably assume are some of the probably most susceptible to being tested or test questions for an FRQ in the AP exam. So, Romanticism continued. We have Chopin, who wrote numerous piano works that highlighted Polish folk songs and dances. So, he's like the Polish Beethoven. We have Franz Liszt, who reflected native Hungarian music. So there's our Hungarian musician. He gave us the Hungarian Rhapsody. He gave us the greatest piano virtuoso of the mid-late 19th century. And he developed a symphonic poem. Remember, poems are everything to Romanticism. A single movement symphonic work that was based on a literary or pictorial idea. We have Dvorak, whose works utilize folk music. There we go again, nationalism. Your brand, like you. What have been you? We have Giuseppe Verdi, who was the greatest Italian opera composer. We're going to see him and talk about him explicitly in number 25 below, so wait for him for just a second. We have Richard Wagner, who was a German opera. Along with Verdi, he is considered the greatest opera composer of the 19th century. His development of the music drama is often considered the culmination of the Romantic era. And he's a German and nationalist composer who strongly emphasized German myths and legends. So there again, we have nationalism and Romanticism there, very much intertwined. We have Peter Chaikovsky, who's the most well-known. Here's our Russian composer. Perhaps the most gifted European composer in the creation of beautiful melodies. You will recognize his works because they are the Nutcracker and the Swan Lake. They are the symphonies that follow those ballets. And so I'm sure at some point you've been exposed to them, especially Swan Lake. I think there's like the cartoon when you guys were kids. But if you've ever been to a Nutcracker performance or Swan Lake, it is his music that accompanies those. So very beautiful melodies. The 1812 Overture and Mark Slav are but 2 examples of his use of folk songs and the creation of memorable melodies, so he has those to his credit as well. And then moving on, just a brief talk about the last category of Romanticism, and that is going to be its use in architecture. The Romantic era will return, just like it had for history, just like it had for poetry, just like it had for literature, just like it had for music, return to medieval ideals. It's a Romanticism of the history in certain respects. Gothic revival architecture will return in some notable cases. The most notable is going to be the architecture for the British Houses of Parliament. Here's a night scene. Here is a day scene, very beautiful if you get to take a water tour to go by at night. I'd highly recommend that. It was rebuilt in the mid-1800s and it's perhaps the most famous example of the return to Gothic architecture, or the revival of Gothic architecture during the Romantic time. Okay? So, why is all of this important to us? Not to just get all mushy and filly on Valentine's Day. It's not a special Valentine's Day lecture. Romanticism has a connection to politics and revolution. And that is because the philosophy of Romanticism is that they believe in revolutionary movements that would give people more freedom and control over their lives. Be yourself, march to your own door. You can't do that if somebody's holding you down, if they have their thumb on you. They supported nationalistic movements that emphasize cultural traditions and the languages of Europe's varied peoples. This is that, your folk stories, your folk songs, your vernacular, your language, okay? Revolutionary movements were highly idealized and probably not attainable in light of the political realities of the era, but our romantics, they put it out there. This is what it should be. The art of the period tended to idealize these movements, as we saw. Two great examples of that we've already looked at. In France, we have Eugene Delacroix with the Massacre at Chios, which portrayed the Greek Christians who seek independence as victims of Ottoman savagery. So he's going to use his art to convey this feeling of, have feelings for these people. They are the victims of the Ottomans. Okay? They needed their independence. Liberty leading the people, which we looked at earlier. Here's a little zoom in of that. It's an idealized portrayal of a popular revolution with Marianne, bourgeoisie, and proletariat revolutionaries. Okay, so it's going to, kind of take that revolutionary theme and make it very popular, very idealistic. In Germany, however, we are going to have some disillusionment with the French Revolution, and Napoleon pushed for German romantics towards nationalistic views where individuals could be fulfilled by being part of a national culture united by history. Remember, that is like that, we talked about the German writings are like a lot of individuals out there like toughing the world alone and how to be yourself and be, identify with your national culture. And so, again, we're going to look at Johann Gottfried von Herder, who rebelled against Enlightenment rationalism and was the leader of the Sturm und Drang movement, which we looked at earlier, Sturm und Stress. He urged Germans to study German literature and history, as believed language was a key to national unity, so having that unified language. And we saw, some of that very applicable to the German Revolution in 1848. He believed an individual reached his highest stage of development through a passionate connection with a national community called the Volksgeist, and we talked about that before. Volks being the people, and the people's spirit, the German spirit. Sources such as Grimm's fairy tales will further this notion of a German culture. Remember, they'd gone around the German countryside. It's in the German vernacular. It's the German folk stories, and collected these and put them together into Grimm's fairy tales. And in Italy, we have the popular revolution we talked about yesterday, led by Mazzini and Garibaldi, Giuseppe, both being their first names, had strong idealistic and romantic overtones. Giuseppe Verdi's operas, I told you we'd talk about, and here we are, evoked strong nationalistic views. He was seen in some circles as the figurehead for the Italian unification movement that we talked about in the revolutions of 1848. Some of his early operas can be seen as allegories for the Italian desire to rid Italy of its Austrian and other foreign oppressors. So through his romanticism and nationalism right here together. And in 1847, one of his nationalistic operas nearly sparked a massive riot at its showing. In 1859, the name Verdi was graffitied on walls throughout Italy, not only to celebrate him, and that's this portrait I have down here, not only to celebrate him, but an acronym, Vittorio Emanuele Re, which means King d'Italia. In 12 years, Victor Emmanuel would be king of a united Italy. And so, kind of plays very well hand in hand there. The eventual failures of the revolutions, however, of 1848 are going to lead to a disillusionment of everything we've talked about today, of the romantic goals, and will pave the way for what's the opposite. You always like the Romanticism reacted to Enlightenment. Realism is going to react to Romanticism. Like, don't, your head is in the clouds and all your feelings and stuff. Realism is going to be what we will come back to. But first, we need to talk about what's going on economically. We need to talk about our last ism of this unit, which is socialism. So we talked about socialism a little bit in the Industrial Revolution, and that is because it's a product of its time period. It has witnessed the French Revolution and the Industrial Revolution, and it is a desire to reorganize society due to the flaws that it sees in society after these things. And so the causes of socialism, like I said, are their desire to reorganize society, to establish cooperation and a new sense of community. They have seen increasing misery of the working classes, disturbed liberal thinkers, Bentham and Mill, who we've talked about before, talk about again, who proposed a modification of laissez-faire economics. Liberal practices in politics, such as republicanism and economics capitalism, seem to promote selfish individualism and the fragmenting of society, and so this is something the socialists want to look at. How can we fix this? But it is not going to be until the 19th century did the issue of social justice gain broad intellectual base and greater support, and so we will get to that in a little while. But first, we need to talk about, and we're going to just divide them by nationality, the early French socialists. Just to warn you, they are a little out there. A lot of the socialists can be like a little like ahead in the clouds. But the French especially are a little bit out there, have kind of unattainable goals, kind of like Thomas More that we talked about, with his like utopian society that he was going to create. Some of them have a plan. Others just know what they want but have no plan. So we're going to see kind of a funny mix here. So the early French, if I can speak, socialists are going to propose a system of greater economic equality planned by the government, sometimes called utopian socialism. One of these French socialists is Count Henri de Saint-Simon, and he is going to propose that the thinkers, the men of science, along with industrialization, so industrialization aided by science, can bring about a wondrous new age to Europe. He believed that proper social organization would require the parasites, and he considers the parasites of the social standing to be the court, the aristocracy, the lawyers, the churchmen, the higher ups of the past that we've seen, to give way to the doers. Our scientists, our engineers, our industrialists, all of these new people that have come out of the Industrial Revolution, out of, like the doers, the workers. He sought public works projects and establishing investment banks. Every social institution, he said, should have as its main goal improve conditions for the poor. His followers try to live communally, like, utopian society like Thomas More, but they fall apart. All starts all good, all like, we're going to live together and all happy, and we're going to, the good old days, and everything's going to be shared equally, and kind of follow. It kind of reminds me of that movie, The Village. Let's be all utopian and back in the day, and yeah, look what happened. No, not that extreme, but they fall apart. Our next individual is Louis Blanc, and we just talked about him, so it should sound very familiar. We talked about with the revolutions of 1848. He has a more practical approach than other early French socialists, is why he was able to gain power, and we talked about in the Revolution of 1848. He'd given us the national workshops that had been set up to guarantee full employment. He urged workers to fight for universal suffrage. We talked about that. More people that can vote of all classes will help take control of the state peacefully. He played a role in the June Days Revolution in 1848, as I just said. He believes kind of the root of all evil is competition. He's very anti-capitalist. He sees that everything should be shared. National workshops, right to work. Remember we talked that life, liberty, freedom and a job is what he's going to add there. Pierre Joseph Proudhon is going to give us the work, What is Property? He's pictured here on the left. He believed property was profit stolen from the worker, who was the source of all wealth. He also is going to later influence Karl Marx, who we're going to talk about in a minute. So a lot of these people, Romanticism and Socialism, very influential to Karl Marx, which is going to move us forward into communism as we move through European history. But Proudhon is going to say that there's two kinds of people. People who own something and those who don't. And he is against capitalism. He believes that profit should be shared. He believes it's being stolen from the worker, who without the worker you would have none of this wealth. He's often considered an anarchist. Like if you Google him, you'll find the anarchy sign and him associated very often, as he greatly feared the power of the state. On the right-hand side here is Charles Fourier. And he is if I said that some of them were out there, he is the most out there. He sought a planned economy in socialist communities. He was a traveling salesman in the day, but then he wrote all of his ideas down at night. And he planned out these apartments. They were mathematically planned, where the rich live on top and the poor live on bottom, and they're all caring and cooperative. And 7 utopian communities will be founded like this along his ideas, most of them actually in the United States for those that are reacting poorly to capitalism. But what he's going to say, you're well, they're still divided into upper and lower. And he's going to say your income should be based on what you do. If what you do is unpleasant, you should get paid more money. And if what you do is pleasant, you should get paid less money. And that's how, it's not by the traditional wages that you're going to put, the rich on top. It's going to be those who have the worst jobs. So I don't even know the listing of what would teaching be? Would that be like the more unpleasant job? I don't know. What is that? Cleaning, garbage? I don't know. So anyway, I don't know what his rules were there, but that's how it was set up. He was an early proponent of total emancipation of women. So yay for him there. But he had all these things, but he didn't really have a plan other than these mathematically divided apartment communities. Well, anyway, he wanted to make jobs more like play. All of his stuff sounds really good. I don't think you can disagree with it. He was against marriage, however. He was no marriage. He thought marriage was an actual a form of prostitution, especially in this time period. You have the man earning all of the money and doing all of this stuff, and then what would the woman owe him? But he said you had the right to enter into a sexual union with whoever you wanted, but marriage was a form of prostitution. So just an interesting guy there. He also makes some really weird predictions, and I don't know when he said these were supposed to come true, but just to tell you, how out there he kind of was. He said that we would find multiple moons for the Earth. Not happened yet. I'm pretty sure we might have noticed them already, but he said that. He said the North and South Pole will become tropical. Now this one, I don't know, that could have been lucky get global warming. I don't know. That's one of them. But then my favorite is he said that the world's oceans will turn to lemonade. Yep. Fourier. Follow him. There you go. We also have to talk about here Christian socialism will begin in England around 1848. And this is where some socialists are going to say that the evils of industrialism will be ended if we just turn back to Christian principles. There's that story in the book of Acts about sharing. And if we all just share everything and make it communal and follow Christian values, we'll all be good. But if you remember correctly, then that failed in the book of Acts. So really, does any of this work out? Maybe I'm just being pessimistic. So next, a name that will probably look a little more familiar to you. You have Friedrich Engels, and here's Engels and Marx that we're going to talk about together in just a second. He is going to probably be one of the names that you've heard most associated with socialism, but Marx probably a little bit more. He lashed out at the middle classes in The Condition of the Working Class in England in 1844. He's a future revolutionary and colleague of Karl Marx. who believed that capitalist middle class ruthlessly exploited the proletariat. He said, I charge the English middle classes with mass murder, wholesale robbery, and all other crimes in the calendar, and his ideas will influence Marx, and Marx in turn will influence him, and later socialists. And so that brings us up to scientific socialism or Marxism, you go by either name, developed by Karl Marx and Engels and Friedrich Engels, which we will talk about here. So if The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith was the Bible of capitalism, the book written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels is the Bible of communism. It is one of the most important works of the last 100 years. It was intended to replace utopian hopes and dreams kind of with this brutal militant blueprint, like step by step for socialist working class success. And as we see, they're going to say that communism, social cannot happen without a brutal militant, without some kind of violence. Okay? And we'll get back to that. But just a little bit about them. Karl Marx, his father was Jewish, but he's actually going to convert to Christianity to get a job. But he comes from a very liberal family. Hegel, as I told you earlier, fascinates him, with his dialect, the thesis. He actually will kind of end up being a moocher, though. He's going to meet Engels, who his parents are very wealthy factory owners, and he will actually end up running some of these factories in Germany and England, where he'll meet Karl Marx. But this shows that Engels had firsthand seen like the poor working conditions, and understood, and he will lax on to Marx's ideas, but Marx is actually going to kind of, he's just going to take advantage of the very nice living conditions that Engels is going to give him because of his background. So anyway, moving back into what they give us, taking Hegel's dialect that we looked at early, we're going to talk about the theory of dialectical materialism. And this is where Marx is going to take Hegel's idea and apply it to make all things equal. And he's going to apply Hegel's plan to history. And so this is the Marx's use of the dialect of Hegel's, his economic interpretation of history. He's going to say all human history was determined by economic factors, mainly who controls the means of production and distribution. So we're going to have the dialect in action here. So you have the thesis. First he's going to say all of history. So let's say we're back in the Middle Ages, because that's where they kind of harken back to. You have feudal lords and serfs and peasants. So your thesis, feudal lords who directly opposes them, the serfs and peasants. What does that equal? Well, the city life of the Industrial Revolution. And he's going to say that this class struggle has always been there and always will be there since the beginning of time. There's been a class struggle between the rich and the poor, or the exploiters and the exploited. So the exploiters and the exploited, the rich and the poor. And he is going to say what matters is who owns these means of production and distribution of the economics. And he is going to call this have class, those who have and own the property, the production and the method of distribution, are the bourgeoisie, and those who don't are the proletariat. And so he is going to then give us a theory of surplus value, saying the true value of a product is labor. And since the worker receives a small portion of his just labor price, since they're the ones doing all the work, the difference is surplus value. And that surplus value is being stolen from the worker by the capitalist. The labor part, that profit is stolen by the bourgeoisie. And just Marx is going to believe, just like Proudhon, that we study with the French socialism, that profit should be shared. Marx is going to say that socialism is inevitable, that capitalism contains the seeds of its own destruction, overproduction, unemployment, etc., like all of the evils. And so this is the theory, Hegel's theory, Marx is going to use to prove that socialism is inevitable, that there's going to be more progress, and it's finally going to end up with communism. Okay, so like you had through all history, We have here our thesis is feudal lords, our antithesis is serfs and peasants. That creates our blending of the two. Our new thesis, which equals city life, because we have to move from this era, then people have to move urban. The antithesis of city life is guilds. And then our answer to that, or the blending here, our new thesis is entrepreneurs. Its antithesis are proletariats, labor force required for the entrepreneurs. And our new synthesis is a classless society or communism. And so Marx is going to directly use the dialectical from Hegel to show that socialism is inevitable. He also said that there must be a violent revolution. The increasing gap between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie will be so great that the working classes will have to rise up in revolution and overthrow the elite bourgeoisie. That they will have to rise up, throw off their chains, but it's going to take, he's not shy about it, it will take violence to make it happen. He says at this point then that that will create a dictatorship of the proletariat. So for some time there will be a government of the working class. So working men of all countries unite. After they've risen up, there'll have to be a government for a little while. But after a while, once things become equal, then there will be the creation of this classless society, which is his final synthesis right here, will result in modern capitalism being dismantled, everything being shared, and he gives us this quote, from each according to his abilities to each according to his needs will take place. And what does that mean? Do what you're good at and get paid whatever you need. If you have 12 children, you get paid to support 12 children. If you have one, you get paid to support one. And that's what it means. And we're going to see this impact of this ideal, this kind of utopian socialistic ideal on European politics becoming profound by the late 19th century. I mean, we're going to see China, North Korea, Vietnam, Angola, Russia, and those that said, well, communism hasn't played out, there's still governments there. Well, because Marx and Engels would say that it didn't play out far enough, that communism would work if the state would have withered away, as it should have during that dictatorship of the proletariat. That government should have faded away into a classless society, but it hasn't gone far enough. And you even have proponents of pure capitalism saying that capitalism would be the best if it had gone far enough. So, I mean, there you go. He was also atheistic as well, to give you some background on him, and his views on women are pretty similar to the idea of, the oppressed class of the proletariat. Marx saw women as being actually doubly oppressed. He sees that the struggle of women are not only that they are held down by capitalists that pay them low wages and exploited for their labor, but also by a society that gave them a second-class status. And you can see here, this is a funny little meme here, my Marxist feminist dialect brings all the boys to the earth. It's because he very much supported women, and women are going to eventually play an influential role in the socialist movement in the 19th and earliest 20th centuries, as we are going to see. And again, he was an atheistic philosophy. And so we're going to see how that plays out as well. So that brings us to the end here, except for your charts. So those charts, study those charts. The information does go beyond what we have done so far. Okay, so you only have to worry about up to 1848 in those charts. We will be moving on. But at this time period, you will only have to worry about up to 1848. You have the first couple charts that just cover each ism. Okay, that fully explain those there. And then you have your charts that cover isms by country and how each of those are working out in each country. And you can stop at 1848 right now. We will be continuing on. I hope you have a great 4-day weekend. Don't forget your Unit 7.1 Part 3 through 5 quiz and your group posts that you need to get done. And I will see you next week.